Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the next installment of our present seminar. Today, we are super excited to have Anita Blanchard here to talk to us about the psychology of copresence. I'm particularly excited about this talk because it's from a totally different field, and so I feel like I'm going to learn a lot, which is going to be great. We've been promised we will learn at least one new vocabulary word, so looking forward to that. And yeah, so I guess general announcements. First of all, we're going to have the upcoming talks, the March talks, are going to be in a new platform, Midspace, and so just be on the lookout for your email about how to join the Midspace platform for our next seminar. And speaking of our next seminar, that's going to be Monday, March 7th, and it's Richard Ladner from University of Washington, and he'll be talking about accessibility in virtual events, which is a topic of extreme importance. So we're all going to be excited to hear about that. And so I guess just my standard announcement about how to use this platform, just to remind you all, although I think you've been here before, you can chat during the talk and ask questions in the chat using the two chat bubble icons on the left-hand side bar of your screen. You should also feel free to sit at tables. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch the talk together with your colleagues, which you can do if you're sitting at a table. So navigate your avatar onto a chair or bench and enjoy the talk with your friends. And then on top of that, I think after the talk, we'll take some Q&A, and you can navigate your avatar to a microphone to ask the Q&A in person, live, whatever language we use for that these days. And I think that's pretty much all the announcements I have. So without further ado, let me invite Anita Blanchard to come to the podium.
Great. All right. I think everybody can hear me, and I think you can see my presentation over there. All right. So I'm going to be talking about the psychology of copresence, and both excited and a little bit intimidated to talk about something that's a psychology, something that's definitely information science and technology based from a psychology perspective. So I'm going to start with a little bit about how I got here, just because I think it's important to know when you're interpreting what I'm saying, why I came to that. Way back when I was an undergrad and a master's student, I was in math sciences and operations research, and I am very old. I started programming in 1983, and I started using email in 1985. So I am a big original bleeding edge geek. I worked in the real world for a while, decided I did not care about if anybody got American Express credit card, and I went to get my PhD in organizational psychology. This was a very interdisciplinary program at Claremont Graduate University. I worked with management. I worked with Lynn Marcus, which I hope some people might know who she is, maybe not if you're in IS. I worked in training in sociology, psychology, and communication studies. And my research was on virtual communities, which it was an alt.dot sort of bulletin board, but it looks a lot like what Reddit looks like now. And now I'm currently in a very interdisciplinary organization science program. In fact, I just saw one of my colleagues from Com Studies hop in here. So hi, Camille, I did see you. We are management, psychology, sociology, and psychology, yes. And I'm definitely the biggest geek in psychology and possibly the biggest geek in the whole organization science PhD program. So that's my personal background. Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about my kind of my academic background, kind of what motivates me and what grounds me in my research. And so the first thing comes from Joe Walther in 1995 that human interaction processes online are the same as those face to face. They're just a lot slower. And the reason is we're having a hard time exchanging communication cues. It's just that's the main reason. And it takes longer to develop relationships. What I really like about that is that tells me I like to take what I learn in online relationships and then apply them to face relationships to see what is happening there, because I don't think there's a big difference. And what happens, I find, is that some parts of this theorizing move to the foreground and some move to the background when I move my thoughts from online to face. For example, we're talking about copresence. Copresence is and social presence. I say copresence mostly. You'll see in a minute why. Let's do an example. So that's an online thing. Let's take it face to face and see what it means. So imagine 4 people sitting around a desk at the library. They're not interacting. They're quietly studying. You might think, oh, there's some people waiting, studying at the for a test. But if you found out they're aware of each other, right? They all see each other. But if you found out that they were all studying for the same test the next day, your awareness of their awareness changes. And if they were strangers versus people studying, their social presence changes, because even though they haven't changed any interaction, simply because we know that they all know each other in the class. So I think that's a very interesting thing to look at, copresence and social presence. I also have a background in environmental psychology. I worked with Alan Wicker at Claremont Graduate University, and that has to do with behavior settings and virtual behavior settings, which is one of the reasons I get so excited about Gather. Behavior settings is the psychological approach that people and their objects work together within a particular physical space to achieve something. And I took that to online settings, although way before there was anything like this happening. And it tells me, when I take this face-to-face theory to online, that people are online for a reason. They are not just standing in an empty room without any objects around them. I mean, no one does that face-to-face. So when they're online, there's a reason, there's a purpose, there's interactions they're achieving, and they're working with particular objects. Now, Camille knows this. This has kind of morphed into social materiality, at least from my perspective. And I've heard this word a couple of times. So I'm going to give you my perspective of what this means. We start with technological affordances. And I'm going to use Zoom as an example. The main technological affordance is that we can see each other in video. And so that's very important. But what I like to focus on is the human agency with those affordances. And I hope I'm not confessing as much as I am sharing experiences that possibly on Zoom meetings, even though we're supposed to all be looking at each other, you've probably turned off your video so that people can't see you. You've possibly, never done that. You've possibly even turned off your video to get to the second page of the meeting so that you can leave without anybody seeing you. Okay? You might have even, and you might even be doing this right now, left your video on, but you're checking email. And you're just kind of smiling and nodding and giving thumbs up, these nonverbals, while you're checking your email. So social materiality to me is looking at the affordances, but then how people manipulate them to come up with what they want to do within that context. Okay. All right, so I started out studying virtual communities, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about it, except I want to let you understand why I'm going to talk about why I am concerned about copresence and why I study it the way I do. Okay. When I was a baby academic after graduation, I started to do more research on virtual communities. And I realized there was a hot mess out there of different definitions of community, as well as which entities we call community. My definition is that people have to feel that they're in a community for it to be a virtual community. And other people have many very other definitions. I would consider Reddit a community. At the time I was doing this research, some people called Amazon a community. I don't see Amazon as a virtual community, but many people were arguing that it was. Some people even now call Wikipedia a community, and it would not be the same definition. So one of the cool things about being in psychology and being a geek in psychology is that we're really concerned about what we're defining. And when I say construct, and because I don't know if all disciplines share this, a construct in psychology is an abstract thing we want to study. So in physics, you could call a table, or not in physics. I'm horrible in physics, so I always use them as an example. I don't. I'd like to know more about the Wikipedia, because I do not have experience about the Wikipedia thing. What was it? Oh, construct. A table is an example of a concrete construct. We can all see it. We can measure it. In psychology, our constructs are very fluffy. They're like clouds, and we can't poke them, and we can't easily see them. So the way we determine if we're measuring, if we have the right definition, is that we engage in measuring, making sure that we've got the correct thing, and then we use it in theory and testing. So that is my approach to understanding what I'm studying, because it's a fluffy little cloud. Can I even study this correctly? Okay, so I'm going to go through in detail what a construct definition is. This is from Suddaby in 2010, Academy of Management Review. The definition should be as simple as possible. We want to get the entire fluffy cloud, but not other clouds. So when we're defining our abstract, we want the whole cloud. We need to know what the boundary conditions are. When is it this construct or that construct? And as I see some of the conversation going on with about Wikipedia editing versus Reddit versus the constructs there. When does the virtual community from Reddit apply or not apply to other virtual communities? And that's the boundary condition. And I'd love to see more about the editing on Wikipedia. It should be distinct from other constructs. It should not include causes and effects. We call them antecedents and outcomes or correlates. As part of its nomological network, that's the fancy measurement term for all these things around the construct, and it should work in theory. Okay, blah, blah, blah. All right, that's a construct definition. That's what I use. That is one of my grounding things. So let us learn a new word, a very fancy word called entitativity. Entitativity. Okay, you can practice saying that on your own. Entitativity. Entitativity. An extremely fancy $5 word for one of the most simple constructs you can possibly understand. No, there's no universal construct. All right, so here's entitativity. Imagine that you see some people standing at a bus stop. They're waiting, they're not really talking to each other, they're looking at their phones. You might say, oh, there's a group of people waiting for the bus, but that is not the same as if you saw those same people sitting around a table, interacting with each other within a bounded space. That's definitely a group of people. Entitativity is the variance from the bus stop to the lab. It's a variance in groupness. And the reason that's so important is you can't have a group unless they have some level of entitativity. The folks at the meeting, we're going to assume we can ask them about satisfaction with the meeting group. We can't really ask people about satisfaction with the bus stop. I mean, that's an outcome. We would consider that in psychology a group outcome. We also would say that without enough entitativity, they don't enact group processes. The lab folks, if there's conflict, we're going to hope that they resolve that conflict and work better together. At the bus stop, if there's conflict, they're likely to call in outsiders, perhaps the police. So that's a group process that simply isn't going to happen. So entitativity is a fundamental component of groups. People within and people outside the group need to believe there's some level of groupness before group things happen. Okay, so that's it. As far as antecedents, and I believe this definitely relates to copresence and social presence, there needs to be interactivity. People need to interact with each other, particularly quality interactions. A lot of researchers have just looked at amount of interaction, not quality interaction. They need to believe that they're similar with each other. Similarity characteristics is very well studied. If we saw the people at the bus stop all wearing the same softball outfit, we would know they were a group. They all had on the same team softball outfit. We would assume they were a group of softball players waiting for the bus. They probably would have the same goals of winning the softball team. Certainly the lab has the same goals of doing research. And then we have similarity of outcomes, which is not well studied, but is part of the similarity types of things. We also, part of entitativity has to do with the history of the group. Is there a long series of interactions and boundaries? And I'm making that kind of an important distinction because in psychology, many people, when they talk about boundaries, mean psychological boundaries to entry or leaving, to come in and leave the group. And what I actually mean are real physical boundaries. Like if the bus stop had a shelter and people were grouped in there, we would probably think that was more of a group. I think the boundaries of gather are interesting, that we move around our spaces so we can all see these boundaries that we're interacting with. And as an environmental psychologist, I do find gather to be incredibly interesting as an online environment. Okay, so those are the antecedents. I feel like a group entitativity. Oh, that's right. Yes. Campbell said that entitativity could apply to any social unit. And when he developed this, he said that individuals have an entitativity, like you know that you are a unit separate from other units. As a friend or a romantic couple, you start experiencing different outcomes and enacting different processes. Groups, whether it's a work group or a family, once you name what it is, you begin to expect certain processes to be happening within it and outcomes. And I think more interesting is these larger entities that are online, that are definitely experienced online. A community, an organization, even ethnicity can be considered a social unit. So I'm obviously interested in the work group and the community as entities that people can identify. Okay, all right. What about social presence and entitativity? Let's see here. Here is an example of our table, our fictitious table. If they don't know each other, they're individuals. If they do know each other, they are a group. And we don't know it, it's in their heads. Okay, so here is another picture. This is my research, this is not my research lab. This is my class that I took to Berlin the first week of March in 2020. We got back to America on Sunday and they closed the borders on Tuesday. This was our first Zoom meeting. So my first Zoom meeting on that. And because I'm a geek and because I'm a psychologist, I was like, okay, what's happening here? I know about copresence. What about these folks on the bottom? What about these folks on the bottom? Are they part of this group? Do they feel like they're part of the group? What about this person calling in? What is their copresence and social presence? Even though we see them, are they really there? And my lab also, the first time our lab met on Zoom, one of the senior people could not get his video to work, and he's like, I don't feel like I'm part of this group. I'm not in here. And it made me start to go back and really study more on social presence. So to do that, I looked at definitions. Okay, I'm going to start kind of not in chronological order, but in order of an order that helps me. So Scarbas in 2017 has a great article talking about social presence and copresence. Copresence actually comes from Goffman in 1966, basically saying this is face to face. People perceive each other's and others perceive them. Then Short et al. In 1976 started talking about social presence. That's the salience of others in the interaction and the consequent salience of the interpersonal relationships. Here is where we can take back to that table example. Copresence is if they're sitting there and don't know each other. Social presence is if they're sitting there quietly and they're in the same class. Okay, so that's how I would define this, how I distinguish between them. That said, these are not separate clouds. These clouds overlap each other, and that is a problem. I also have turned and looked at Bianca et al. In 2003, who analyzed and determined definitional problems with social presence, that it's too vague, circular, broad. That's always a problem with definition. And that there's a need to identify the precise psychological state that we're trying to get at. Another issue is that it's overlapping its outcome, which is a problem. That's something we don't want in a definition. And they're not always technologically independent. We need to have technologically independent. So they grouped definitions according to copresence, co-location, mutual awareness, psychological involvement, and behavioral engagement. I've read this article many times. I don't know if anybody else has read this too. But I don't think they came up with a new definition as much as they said this is a grouping of the definitions. And again, as I start using Suddaby's rules or suggestions of how to decide this, behavior is a behavior. That is not a cognitive state. Those cognitions and behavior are different. So that makes interactivity is a distinct construct. Psychological involvement, if we're really talking about mutual understanding, we're talking about perceptions with each other. And that's the whole area of psychology, developing relationships, developing perceptions. That is a different construct too. So I go back to co-location, awareness of each other, and I use copresence. And I'm not sure that's the best, but that is what I do to try to get to the core of what is happening here. And I want to show you another definition that scared me just because it scared me, and I wanted to scare you too. This is, and I don't know who else here, so I hope I'm not offending anybody. This definition is on entrainment. This is some sociologists, which is a synchronization of attention, emotion, and behavior. Entrainment is pretty awesome, but copresence is the degree in which one actor perceives entrainment with the second reciprocates entrainment, and it's a linear function of synchronization at night. Y'all, that definition scares me. It makes me go, okay? So how do we get, I would like to know, what's the relationship of copresence to entitativity? If groups have to have a level of entitativity, how is copresence affecting it? There's a there, which means copresence is real. It's what is scary about it? It's complicated. That's what scares me. It's very complicated. And that, I mean, if it's useful, that's fantastic. But for me, it's complicated, and I want a simple definition. So, and because I want to see how it's, yes, that is also a problem too. Yeah, please ask questions, because, as I said, I may be, maybe, yeah, maybe. I don't want to be speaking a foreign language. So if I start saying something that doesn't make sense, I don't know it because I'm deep in this literature. So please call and say, hey, what the heck are you talking about? Okay. So what's the relationship of copresence to entitativity? There is a there there. Okay. It's real. You notice people and you don't. And if you don't feel noticed, that's a bad thing. And you don't feel part of the group. So I have to link it to very, oh yeah. Linking this to entitativity. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to start with a whole other thing. Social categorization process. And I'm going to apply it to here. We are always sorting ourselves and others into social units. So I have kind of sorted us all into a symposium on social presence. I've sorted this. You probably have sorted yourself into different things. The important thing is that social categorization leads to social identity. And what this means, in this talk, you may have thought to yourself, or since you've been here, am I an individual? Am I alone here, an individual in this? Or am I part of this group or a group? Am I, Anita keeps talking about psychologists. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not in that group. It may have prompted you to think about your own academic discipline as being part of that. So social categorization is a very important continual process of putting ourselves into groups and as individuals. Okay, entitativity underlies this process, and I've got Blanchard and Allen. This is under revision at Organizational Psychology Review. We are really trying to tease apart where entitativity is, and although copresence or social presence is not part of that paper, I do think it's part of this process. So you have to perceive a group to be in it. And copresence has to be there. If you're perceiving other people to be in a group, there has to be some copresence available there. So what about social categorization and entitativity? So part of our and this I don't know, and this would be interesting to see what you think about this. And this, obviously, this is a working paper because this is working thoughts coming up right now. So when people are alone, we have argued, and I think this is important because if we're thinking about feeling like a group and people are no longer working together, if people aren't working together, they still categorize themselves into groups based on perceiver readiness. And that's basically, I've got to do a task or I need to enact a role. That works better when you feel like you have a strong group and you have a strong identity with it. When my lab goes to work during the week between our meetings, they will, I hope, when they start to do their task, I think, oh, we're the vice group. The vice lab, oh, I feel strong about that. That's a good group. I will work hard for them, and all these positive things happen. Where's copresence there? Is imagination part of it, or is it just coming from the identity? I don't know. I was going to say it wasn't there, but I just read an article by Ashcroft saying that people imagine their friends when they're working virtually, and that may provide some sort of presence, which is kind of weird. So, but when people are together, yeah, we start this social categorization process by just being aware of others and feeling like seeing others and thinking, oh no, I'm not part of that group, I'm an individual. Seeing others and thinking, I am part of this group. Or seeing others, I'm watching that group. I'm not necessarily an individual, I'm on the border of it, watching that group. So maybe a little hint. That is my that's the basis of my definition of copresence. Okay. So what about copresence, social presence, and entitativity? Where is it in the entitativity process? Is copresence an antecedent, a correlate, or an outcome? I don't know. I think social presence is either a correlate or an outcome, because I think to have an understanding of people, you have to interact with them and get to know them. So I think that's either a correlate or an outcome of social presence. Is an antecedent what? Also is copresence an antecedent of what social unit we start thinking about? So if you're interacting with one person, to some people or many others, does that trigger a categorization into a dyad, a group, or a community? I don't know. I think it does. I think it's interesting. So my working copresence definition is Goffman-ish. It's also group, because a lot of Goffman's work and the measures are dyads. I'm aware of you, you're aware of me. I think there's more to it. Also, I want to bring up, because I said I was going to talk about this in my little thing. I find it very interesting that in hybrid meetings, when I've talked to people feel like they're part of the group until they try to ask a question. So the people online absolutely feel like they're part of the group until they try to get attention and they realize no one sees me. I'm not seen, and I'm all of a sudden moved from being a member of this group to being outside and not part of it. And it's very, very disturbing for folks. And then the third one I think is interesting, and this comes from my virtual community research, that in large groups, I think it's possible for you to be aware of others. You know they're not aware of you, but your perceptions are that they are very aware of each other. Other people are aware. And I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but there's something about being a lurker in a large group that they don't know me. I feel like I'm part of this group. I see others, but it's because they're interacting with each others. So definitely a large group. I think big meetings could be part of that, where you're on the second page and your video is off. They're having a successful meeting because they're interacting with each other, not because of me. It could be here. I mean, I can't tell if you guys are talking to each other at the tables, but that could be happening. And obviously Reddit. Okay. Sounds like Facebook. Yes. Oh, yeah. Facebook is interesting. Yeah, I've done Facebook research looking at entitativity on Facebook. So putting that with social categorization theory, I work in progress. I see others. Others see me, and others see others. This is, I identify the entity of when I see others, of what it is. Others see me or not. Am I with the group? Am I watching the group? And then the strength of groupness that goes on here. Okay, so current research questions. We're working on the measurement and theory validation. We're not sure where that's going. The first measure was not good. It had too much overlap in questions, so we're trying to really separate them out. Construal theory is a new issue. And construal theory, this is awesome, and I hope I get you guys to think about, if you leave this, I would love for you all to think about two things: entitativity and construal theory. Construal theory is a psychological theory that physical distance is related to psychological distance. So the closer you believe people are to you physically, the more nuanced and deeper your understanding of them. And the closer you believe people, the further they are from you physically, like geographically, the more abstract they are and the less you really understand them. So as an example, and this applies to coworkers and group members, and there's growing research supporting this. So my co-located or even in the same city member has good days and bad days. My distributed coworker is either good or bad. When leaders talk to members that are close to them, they can use concrete goals. When they talk to followers that are distant, they need to use abstract visions to be effective. That is some stuff that I have not really studied before. It's very interesting. Does a shared virtual environment reduce this? Does gather reduce this? Do informal interactions that in a shared virtual environment reduce this? If we're all here, can I develop nuanced understandings of folks? Yeah, I think it works for everything. Yes, I think it works for everything. But then again, you can reduce the distance through more communication and through interactions with each other. So yes, you can reduce the psychological distance between things. And I'd say if you know somebody and then they move away, you have distance, but it still can be, in general, they're still going to be more abstract than if they were right beside you. I thought I had more. All right, well now, all right, any questions? I'm fine to talk to questions now. I'm going to turn off my screen share.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this amazing talk. I love having so many perspectives from psychology or social psychologist point of view. It reminds me of, I don't know, 3 years ago when I was working on my thesis, and my research comes very much from the technological side or design side, but I work with communication technologies. So it was a little bit hard to navigate myself through Goffman and Walther and things like that. And I wish I had this talk 3 years ago. So I will now I will dive on your research a bit more. I find this fascinating, and it reminds me a little bit of some of the things that I would like to discuss here in a few weeks when I present some of my work. And one of the examples that I can think of that I came across, I don't know, something that makes me think about it is a simple example of Slack and the custom emojis. I don't know if you've used the custom emojis on Slack. I'm probably part of 8 different Slack teams right now, and they all have different sets of custom emojis, and they are definitely reflecting the kind of inside jokes or different practices that belong to each group.
Oh no. Is that me? Am I moving?
Yeah, no, her video, her internet connection seems, but
I'd be happy to answer that, and I wish she was here to hear it. Oh, she's coming back. Yes.
How do you think that customizations?
Absolutely. There's actually been research on that from text interaction. So from an environmental psychology perspective, people have ownership of their whatever technologies they have. So people want to customize and make it individual to me. So I think that actually absolutely happens. And those in my research on virtual communities, we saw that people absolutely use these inside things to signal this group is different from another group. So those custom emojis are absolutely signaling we are different. We are a group. These are our symbols that are unique to us. And in creating, creating your own identity. When we were looking at the kind of Reddit, which I have not studied Reddit, but in the alt universe I was in, people put their signature files in there, and that in the bulletin boards that communicated so much information, including why they were part of this group, what their credentials were related to the group, to give people a kind of shorthand of information that they provide. So I think customizing is actually very important, especially if it helps make a group different. It makes this group so when you move into it, you actually, and there's been some great research by Tom Postma's that a person can move into these different groups and start behaving in a way that's appropriate for that group. So it's not individually based, it's group based from the norms of that group. Did I fully answer that question? Was another part?
No, thank you. I mean, mostly I'm happy to hear about more pointers that can teach us more about this. And I think it's I think it's a pretty good point, the fact that what you mentioned about ownership and how it helps customizations might help signaling like this is us and we're different from them.
And this is me. And I'm that's another thing too, is people want to be important and different. It's an odd tension of being similar to the people in the group, but also different and accepted. So it's called individual distinctiveness, that I can be a little funky in my group and I'm still part of this group.
Yeah, it's also interesting to think about, as an organizer, can we introduce these or do they have to arise organically? But I think we have one more question and then we'll move to the informal part. So Jason Hartline's been patiently waiting in line. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the fascinating talk. It's really nice to see these concepts organized because, you know, as we've been trying to make these spaces happen, we've been thinking about these things, but just have been completely unorganized about it. So this is really helpful. I have a question actually similar to Benjamin's question, but I guess less specific, and that is, you know, since psychology has organized these concepts to understand, you know, what happens in these groups and where there's sort of, you know, something, you know, how these things are different. I think that's really great. Is there a sort of an engineering subfield of psychology that looks at how you make these, like, you know, if you were to say that some interactions are better than others, then how would you steer these groups or whatever towards interactions that are better? Like, is there an engineering, you know, how do people who are planning these meetings or organizing these groups, how do they get those groups to do good things?
That's three thoughts. Human factors does look at technology, but it's different types of technology and how people use it. It's different. It's not so much online as it is the technology in people's environments and how people can use it. And the question, so that was one question. Then you were saying about how do we get people to use this, designing it so we can use it?
My question is not about technology, actually. It's just about, you know, understanding that these are the concepts and that we, you know, oftentimes, you know, if we're organizing a situation, we care about getting outcomes along the lines that you were talking about with this interaction or this community. Like when I start teaching a new class for the first lecture, I've got to, like, you know, set some, you know, I've got to get things started off right so that, you know, there's these groups of the students in my class. And this happens like just everywhere. Like, you know, people who are leading stuff are always trying to create these communities that, you know, every single organization does it, right? So I'm just wondering about whether there's a psychology of the engineering of these.
There's the engineering. Yeah. So the leader has a lot of control over this. And my suggestion to folks is be purposeful when you're trying to create groups, that you know the things that are going to help create the groups. And I would say similarity of communicating the goals and facilitating interactions. Those would be the first thing to kind of start that entitativity process. And then after that, as a group starts recursively going back and forth, it develops further. Once they develop the history, then you can start building on it. So also, I didn't mention in here because this is more of an outcome of it, but the norms. So you want to set up norms that increase communication and interaction with each other and perceptions that we're alike. and we're going to work together on this.
I believe Benjamin has a comment or follow-up question as well. You're unmuted. You can just talk.
Yes, I do. I guess this is the one last, or maybe one last plus one question, but maybe everybody is interested in this. If we want to know more about how to intellectually navigate in this area, but we don't have time to do a PhD in it, what are the first couple of things we should read?
I have a paper on measuring entitativity, which explains, it's a measurement paper, but it actually goes through the theory, and it looks at two online groups and two face-to-face groups. That would be one place to start. We also have some, so I'm just going to, that would be one place to start. We also have got some meetings in entitativity and the importance of developing entitativity in meetings. There's a paper that's in press, and then we have a theory paper and a book chapter, as well as this theoretical paper we're working on. So those should give you the ideas of entitativity for specifically interacting groups. There are other entitativity papers about the effects for larger groups, which I refer to, but that would be essentialism. So that would be place to start, and then you can look at the citations and what I've cited.
The second thing you mentioned was you said there was a book and something and a paper in press. Is the paper in press available anywhere?
It will be very soon. I just finished the proofs, so I guess I can pass it out. I haven't read what they're telling me to do, but yeah, you should be able to read that.
Okay. Would you be willing to give
absolutely.
a link to a preprint?
Yeah, if you throw the link in the chat to the current room, then if you're comfortable, then everybody.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, it's just like now I have to do typing in front of people, and that's always very.
Okay, you can send it to us later as organizers, and we can distribute it via the website or the mailing list. I think, yeah, and just to keep some time for informal conversations, I will end the Q&A here and invite you, Anita, to join us in the room and wander around the various tables, and we can all continue asking her questions in the at the tables. So thanks so much for this talk. It was really fun for us.
Thank you.
This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.